Namaste everyone. My registration number is TSKP 2017-163. Singing is my passion. My mom and dad inspired me to sing. Shreya Ghoshal is one of my favorite singers. My singing teacher's name is Rashmi Nanavati. Last year, I participated in Star Kalakar and I was one of the finalists. This year, I'm excited to participate and I hope that I win.
Namaste, my name is Pavitra Chakravarti and I'm here with Kalyan Vishwanathan and Srinath Chakravarti, and we are discussing Reza Aslan's Believer that aired on CNN last Sunday. So Kalyanji, there's something that has always been very curious to me. When a system that worked so beautifully like the Jati Varna system, your Varna Vyavastha, which was intrinsic to the fabric of Hindu society and also embedded in the spirituality, else you would not have it mentioned in so many of our scriptures. So it was definitely part of our spirituality. So to shy away from that or to say that it's a social construct is not only inaccurate, but it doesn't do you justice as a follower of the faith to distance yourself from that.
Yeah.
It was something that worked and it worked beautifully.
Yeah.
What was the point, or rather how did this transition from a system that was beneficial and to the good of all the people that were under it become the much I guess very misrepresented and also the very maligned caste system as we know it, because even Hindus today don't know about Jati Varna. They refer to it as caste system, which is what we were taught in our history books.
Yeah.
So what made this transition and at which point did it happen?
Okay, this is again a tremendously significant question. Okay, and I want to perhaps take it in certain stages. So first of all, I'll just give a small story. I was at an academic discussion at an institution called the Graduate Theological Union, where a professor of religion by the name Dr. Ananthanand Ramachan had come to deliver a talk, and his talk was basically centered on interreligious study in a spirit of friendship. Can interreligious study be undertaken in a spirit of friendship? It was a wonderful talk. I mean, it was a wonderful question to ask to begin with. But then he was interrupted during the talk by some person sitting in the audience who stuck his hand up and said, "But Professor Ramachan, but what about the caste system?" And immediately, as soon as he brought up the caste system, it destabilized the conversation. So for every Hindu, if you bring up the caste system, immediately the Hindu will retreat, because they don't have the intellectual wherewithal to deal with the enormous criticism and accusation that has been laid at the doorstep of the so-called caste system. Okay, this is number one. So people seek out easy answers. There are many groups that say, "Oh, caste system is bad throughout our history; it needs to be disappeared." And if you read the modern accounts, from Gautama Buddha to Ambedkar, everybody has been trying to get rid of the caste system. However, it doesn't go away. On the other hand, Narendra Modi has just won in Uttar Pradesh, a landslide election.
Congratulations.
Right? And newspapers are already writing, there was a very, very clever caste arithmetic that went into his victory.
Caste arithmetic?
Caste arithmetic, which is, a coalition. And it's real. See, elections today in India are fought on the basis of caste coalitions. We can bring the upper castes and the OBCs and the Dalits and this community together, you get one coalition. if you get the Yadavs and the Jats and some other group together, you get another coalition. So in other words, elections are fought on the basis of caste-based coalitions. Okay, it's real, and they are not going to go away. They are strengthening, and the certain castes, certain jatis in India are able to see and have already experienced a pathway to power and influence and prosperity through fighting on the basis of caste in our elections. So this is real. Nobody is going to get rid of it.
Right.
Nobody can also. Okay, people can talk about it. One can say that this should not be there. It should not be so. We should all just abolish the caste system once and for all, and become some sort of a homogeneous universal mass of individuals with no affinities to communities whatsoever. One can take that, and that sounds like a very enlightened, liberal, modern, academic kind of position, but it is completely unrealistic, and it just sets one up to sort of be a big pontificant on this matter, without understanding that groups and communities have been at the center of the architecture of Hindu society in India. The group, the community has always been senior to the individual in India's society, and conformity to the norms and values and traditions and practices of one's own community is intrinsic to the architecture of Indian society,
as opposed to Western, which is more
individualistic,
merit based.
Yeah, and if you consider Western society to be a free floating mass of individuals with no affinities whatsoever, even they will arrange themselves into these classes, whether it is super rich, the top 1% against whom everybody was railing in the last election in America, and then the next 10% who have this much wealth, and then you have the next, and then the fourth. So just from a wealth based hierarchy, wealth and power are correlated, by the way. Wealth and power hierarchy, if you look at it, there is a caste system in the West also, and the privileges that are available to the top 1% or the top 0.1% are simply inaccessible to the bottom 10%. Even in 3-4 lifetimes, 4 generations, that inequality will remain.
I want to give one interesting example of. I know that sometimes we like to say that Western groups and classes would be economically based, but the previous Pope who took retirement, Benedict the 16th, when he retired, it was stated that he would go into a separate, modest home in the outskirts of the vicinity of Vatican, and for the sake of his own comfort and ease of living in his last several years, he would be in the company of this German-based Catholic congregation and nuns, specifically drawn from that group. Now, if you're a Catholic, if you're a former pope, why are you seeking comfort in a select group of individuals that come from your own background? Yeah. To me, it's nothing other than taking refuge in your own jati for the sake of how good you feel in your last days on earth. Yeah. So these groups exist throughout Europe. There are the Cossacks, there are other communities that we don't really understand them very well. But if you study Europe, you'll see that they're still prevalent today. And those groups take comfort in their own communities, in their own interactions. And Pope Benedict is a good example. It just shocked me that that would be available to a Pope.
So these group affinities are there everywhere. Right. Okay. In India, it has gotten a little bit more systematic formation, and for the longest time, it served Indian society very well. For example, we have to recognize that when the outsiders were trying to invade India, were trying to conquer India, were trying to colonize India, when Christopher Columbus was looking for India when he stumbled on America, for example, right? Why were they coming to India? Because India was very wealthy. India was rich in so many things, so many ways. The modern economists are agreed that India's share of the world's GDP was almost a third of the one-third or so.
So which year? What?
It was so even as late as 1600, 1780.
Not too far back.
Not too far back. You know. So the system which we call the caste system, the Varna Vyavastha, the Varna Jati system, was in place through the years of prosperity and stability of India also. And it is in place in the period of decline and impoverization also.
Yes.
And it's in place in India when India is trying to come back up again and recover, bootstrap itself, and people are trying to emerge from annihilating poverty that the British left us in. It's there. So in other words, this is a system that has survived thousands and thousands of years. I mean, you compare it to democracy, Western democracy, for example, it's a few hundred years old. So the Varna Jati system, by virtue of the sheer longevity of its existence, is worthy of a deeper understanding and study beyond the cliches that academics deliver towards it, which is to say that it's all a terrible system, exploitative, it violates human rights, and therefore it has to be destroyed, and therefore Hinduism itself stands guilty of having promoted it. Nothing is farther from the truth. Okay, so the so-called decline, even the decline, if we were to say there was a decline, we had to ask ourselves how much of the decline was precipitated by factors such as invasion and colonization and conquest and so on. What effects did those phenomena themselves have on the Varna Jati system?
And
which is a question that academics don't want to ask.
So Kalyan, this, as you were saying that, I just thought of this. The British were known for their divide and rule system.
Yeah.
And obviously they played on the weakness that was inherent in the caste system just by this particular policy.
Right.
So do you think that what began as a very well designed system basically decomposed into the mess it is right now because of this divide and rule policy?
Definitely. You see, we had to recognize two phenomena. In fact, the British impact on India is one phenomenon. The impact of Islamic invasions of India is another phenomenon also that we have not properly, as a whole, assimilated and understood. Okay. See, instead, what has happened is a sort of a Nehruvian narrative,
socialistic
narrative that extols the syncretic Hindu-Muslim culture of India. Somehow there is a syncretism between, So I was just in Mumbai. I was at the Gateway of India in Mumbai, and there it says this Gateway of India was built in honor of King George V, and it is drawn from the architectural patterns of both Hindus and Muslim architecture, which is right there. So the syncretism of Hindu-Muslim architecture and society, and to promote that syncretism has been politically more important in India than to honestly examine the impact of Islamic invasions on India. And one specific area which I believe has been very poorly examined and understood is to what extent were Hindu populations living in various parts of the country in India were displaced, and they had to run for life, run for cover. And displaced populations in India invariably did not get assimilated so easily into other societies, and they became sort of these in-between populations that weren't fully properly integrated, and was one of the sources of this enormous expansion of the so-called untouchables and Dalits in India. Okay, so if the total Dalit or untouchable population, Antyagnya, the Sanskrit word to use, is only 0.001% in a nation, it's not a problem. Just like in the US, if the number of people who are in prisons is a sufficiently small number, it's not a problem. But if the number swells, if 10% of the US is in prison, something is not right.
Right.
You know, so therefore, we do have a problem. We have a huge problem, and we have to find a way out of this problem. But it's not simply to blame Hinduism for all the problems and simply say that, okay, the Bhagavad Gita is guilty of promoting the caste-based discrimination and exploitation. It is, however, true that in the aftermath of conversions and invasions and so on, colonization, Hindus have largely become very much self-oriented. They want to take care of themselves, their families, and pursue their own individual well-being without a sufficient association with their well-being of their own larger community. In this case, we can say jati or caste, or even the well-being of the larger Hindu community, which is a tapestry of jatis and castes. So, this is a challenge for our community, legitimate challenge, and we should face it. You know, but it's not. We cannot face it by trivializing the whole phenomenon and simply blaming it on our Hinduism or Hindu scriptures and texts and so on. And that would be my perspective on it.
And I want to pick up like 3 specific points from what Kalyan just mentioned. One, I think it's important for our viewers to know. Nowadays there is a fashion. Okay, anything good about the subcontinent, say it's India. Anything bad about India, say it's because of Hinduism.
That's right.
Right. And then the second thing is Hindu selfishness. Okay. Now, I'm not saying that Hindus aren't doing anything outside of their own children and family. They probably contribute to mandirs and gurus. But when you say selfish and unselfish, we mean a samajika charitra, which is a community character, right? Not just individual character, a national character, community character, a Hindu dharmic character that seems to be lacking, and the gap is wide open for us to be exploited, right? Final thing is, like again, like Kalyan said, right? What is the jati varna system of of antiquity? Hinduism is dynamic. Hinduism evolves. That's its strength. It's not cast in stone. It's not history centric. It's not dominated by a single book. So it evolves, and the evolution of Hinduism includes the evolution of jati varna as well, and its response to colonialism, conquest, and other things. And that has been deliberately being ignored by academics. You want to superimpose a jati varna of an ancient period on today, and you want to paint this as irrelevant and of negative consequences.
So I didn't realize that it evolved too along with.
Absolutely, it has a life cycle. It responds. It's dynamic. Otherwise, it would be gone by now. Correct. So, and some of the responses are what you see in modern day politics. Like the Yadavs were not a political force in Gautam Buddha's time. Today they are in UP. So these are modern day evolutions of jati varna, how it manifests in response to a changing world, and that's not being depicted at all. Correct. So those are 3 things I think our viewers should know. One is how we blame Hinduism for all the ills. Right. Second is we don't take our own responsibility to be more integrated with Hinduism and those unselfish approaches. Third is the cast in stone, the Abrahamic lens of jati varna. That's not appropriate. So.
Right. So lack of accountability and the fact that a religion is so adaptable, these are not being given the kind of attention that it deserves. Well, we are going to take a short break. We will be back. I'm with Kalyan and with Srinath, and we'll be back after a short break.
Namaste. I'm Sasha Singh, and I'm here to tell you about the 3rd season of Texas Star Kalakar. Do you have a passion for singing and dancing like I do? Well, Texas Star Kalakar is the perfect platform for you to showcase your talent. Who knows, maybe you can be the next Texas Star Kalakar.
Namaste everyone. My registration number is TSK P2017-163. Singing is my passion. My mom and dad inspired me to sing. Shreya Ghoshal is one of my favorite singers. My singing teacher's name is Rashmi Nanavat. Last year, I participated in Star Kalakar and I was one of the finalists. This year, I'm excited to participate and I hope that I win.
Namaste, my name is Pavitra Chakravarti and I'm with Kalyan Vishwanathan and Srinath Chakravarti, and we're discussing Reza Aslan's Believer that aired on CNN last Sunday. So Kalyanji, Srinath made a very valid observation, I thought, where he basically said that emphasized the dynamic nature of Jadi Varna. In other words, it evolves as your situation changes. Right. Can you elaborate?
Yeah, this is a very important idea that Hindus must understand. See, jatis can rise and fall on the Varna scale, and they have throughout our history. See, for example, if you are born in a Brahmana jati, it's merely a starting point. But if you don't do anything that is sort of conforms to the dharma of a Brahmana, that is, right, you don't do the duties, you don't perform the duties of a Brahmana, in time you will fall from the Brahmana jati, in time. Now what does in time mean? Okay, in time means across generations. It will take several generations. A jati can fall. For example, when Kshatriya jatis were displaced from power, what do they become? They become Shudras. In some cases, they become Dalits also, untouchables also. I'll give you an example. Okay, recently in Tamil Nadu, there was this politics around, the succession to Jayalalitha, right? And for a brief period, the chief minister was supposed to be Mr. Paneerselvam, O. Paneerselvam, and his wife's name is Vijayalakshmi Nachiyar, Paneerselvam's wife. Okay, Paneerselvam belongs to the Tevar community, and Vijayalakshmi Nachiyar belongs to the Nachiyar community. They are two jatis. Now, if you go back in history, just 200 years, in the late 1700s, the Tevar communities were ruling various parts of Tamil Nadu. They were kings. They were Kshatriyas. Today they are considered OBCs. Okay, so in 200 years they went from Kshatriyas to OBCs. Now the OBC, by the way, is not a classification that is intrinsic to India. A scheduled caste and other backward caste, a backward caste, these are classifications that the British created during they started in the 1871 census and kept it up 1881, 1891, on and on. Right. So now India has assimilated these characterizations of peoples as though they are static in nature. They are not. So just like the Kshatriyas, the Nachiyars and the Tevars, they fell from being Kshatriyas down to Shudras and other characters.
In just 8 generations.
In a few generations. But electoral politics, the electoral realities of democracy, have brought them back into Kshatriya status. The Tevars have a say now. Even that Sashikala in Tamil Nadu is from the Tevar community. So in other words, right, the empowerment, people in the so-called lower caste communities gaining wealth, becoming Vaishyas, gaining power and becoming Kshatriya, and gaining knowledge and wisdom, becoming Brahmanas, has always been a possibility in Hindu society. It perhaps was not so fast. It didn't happen in one generation. It took 2, 3, 4 generations for these rises and falls to happen. But the dynamism of the jati system was always there. And jatis that got depressed in a certain era have risen in other eras and have fallen in other eras. Therefore, to look at these communities as static, and they rise and fall through their own effort and through the effort of circumstances and so on. So, bottom line is, this is a dynamic system, not to be confused with the static construct that British understanding imposed upon this system.
Right.
And to a large measure, Hindus themselves are very confused about this. They think, once you are born in a particular caste, you are, so let's look at this. Many Brahmins today, what are they doing? Are they pursuing Brahmin dharmas? If you ask the question, no, they are not. They are software engineers. They are in the IT world. They are doctors. They are doing things which are not exactly consonant with the dharma as articulated by the dharma shastras. Okay, so what will happen? It is guaranteed that in generations, in 2-3 generations, those children, grandchildren, etc., will be indistinguishable from Vaishyas and Shudras. That is guaranteed. Simultaneously, if a Shudra or a Dalit or an untouchable, whatever we may call that person, if he or she pursues, say for example, an entrepreneurial career and make a lot of wealth, well, they are sent to the state of Vaishyas. If they study Sanskrit, this is called Sanskritization, by the way, in a sociological context, written widely by a professor by the name M.N. Srinivas. This is a very dynamic process, and we need to understand it in its dynamic reality rather than its sort of stratified or a fossilized perspective that Western academia's representation delivers to us.
That was, Srinath, do you have anything to add to this?
No, I just meant to say that the framework of Jati Varna within the dharmic context is where Hinduism draws the maximum benefit out of it. And I want to say that because in theory, Jati and Varna can be applied to anybody, because Jati is a species and Varna is an ability. So what is Reza Aslan's Jati and Varna? Reza Aslan's Jati is someone who was born in the Iranian peninsula, central heartland of Iran. He descends from ancient Persians, etc. That's his Jati. He can never change that. It's like DNA. What is his Varna today? He has reached some place where he has become a Kshatriya, attacking other religions, faiths. He's immersing himself in this activity, that activity. He's also a Vaishya, may point out, because he accumulated enough wealth to be a wealth interest and an influence in these two areas. So everybody has Jati Varna, but the Jati Varna within the framework of Dharma is what Hinduism values, and that's another thing we need to understand. Right?
Well, Srinath, I think Reza Aslan never took the trouble to understand caste system in an intrinsic Jati Varna system, but Srinath has done him the big favor of actually casting him in a Jati Varna mold. So, this is the true nature of Hinduism. We treat everyone within a very, very fair and just equitable system. So, Kalyan, I have to bring up a question that may be not very politically correct, but leading to what you said about static versus dynamic. Isn't it unfortunate that Brahmanas are such a maligned Jati now? Yeah. In other words, they basically preserved our Vedas and all of our scriptures when at a time when the invasions and just everything done to thwart the system and to basically make it extinct. Yeah. They took tremendous personal risk to themselves. They ingested and they assimilated the Vedam and all the other sacred scriptures and passed it down generations, such that now we still have some of them left over, as opposed to certain civilizations that have been wiped out, like the Assyrians, for example. Right. Right. So isn't it unfortunate that the very people who sacrificed their lives for such a noble deed are so maligned now?
Yeah. So it's very important for us to understand. See, Hinduism itself as a whole, Hindus as a whole, are a soft target. The Brahmins within Hinduism are an even softer target. Yeah. Why? Because they will not respond, they will not attack you in return. they will not pick up arms or do anything to defend themselves. They just sort of brush it off and go about their own lives, which makes them a soft target. See, Reza Aslan, it's important to understand, could not have made a similar show on Islam that he did on Hinduism. If he had done a similar show on Islam, there would be an enormous reaction, even leading to potential personal threat to Reza Aslan.
Absolutely.
Because of the oversight that Islam exercises on scholars around the world.
That's right.
On the other hand, Hindus exercise no oversight on scholarship on Hinduism around the world. It's very critical to understand this.
Yes.
Our Swamis, Gurus, Acharyas, Yogis, our Sannyasis, they do their work, their dharma, they do their dharmic activities to the best of their abilities, but they exercise no control, no influence, no oversight on what is legitimately considered a narrative about Hinduism. Nor do we have scholars in the academia who we could consider as legitimate overseers of the narratives about Hinduism. Right. So we don't have anybody. You see, so in a sense it is roughly equivalent to this, just like Western companies are outsourcing IT development and software maintenance to India. Hindus have outsourced the study of Hinduism to Westerners. And our Brahmanas, the Brahmins, who for thousands upon thousands of years were custodians of the spiritual and intellectual heritage of the Hindu traditions, in the last 200 years or so, for various reasons, have ceased to be custodians. And I would gently make one criticism about some of our own fellow Brahmins, who are very ritualistic. They go to temples, they do a lot of puja, and they do a lot of japa and yajna and homas and all this. I would ask them, do you realize you are custodians of an enormous tradition, a tradition of spiritual and intellectual, a body of knowledge that is so vast, and preserving and passing on, transmitting that knowledge, that heritage to future generations was so much a part of who you are as a Brahmana, right? If you don't understand that, no amount of, I'm afraid, doing rituals and pujas is going to help. It's going to help because, you see, Brahmanas were custodians of these traditions, these knowledge traditions, intellectual and spiritual traditions, not for themselves, but for the whole of Hindu society.
Right.
Just like Kshatriyas were kings and rulers and commanders of armies, not for themselves, but for the whole of Hindu society. Okay, so this was the interdependent nature of what it was to be a Brahmana.
Right.
But if you lose that context, and a Brahmana says now that my job is to be an IT professional or a doctor or whatever, and I'll make a lot of money, but do a few rituals on the side just to sort of keep my personal family traditions going, I'm afraid it is simply insufficient in the face of the extraordinary challenges we face, like Reza Aslan and CNN in this instance.
So Kalyan, the thing is, people can't change the lifestyle or the fact that globalization, industrialization has vastly changed the landscape,
Yes,
not only of the Western world, but to a large extent India.
Yes.
So we can't expect people to give that up and revert back to how life was, several generations ago.
Yeah.
But I think the point you're trying to make is that in addition to that, in addition to the ritualistic aspect, enough time needs to be devoted towards learning our real history, learning things that we should take pride in and not run away from or be apologetic for, and be able to combat such attacks in the future, because Reza Aslan is today, we will have 10 Reza Aslans and we don't have sufficient firepower on our side.
Yeah.
So basically we need to build that arsenal of intellectual Kshatriyas at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very important point, okay, very important point. It's very difficult to turn the clock back and go back to an earlier era when, you know, we completely recover the Brahminical traditions, number one, okay. But at the same time, the metaphor and idiom of the modern world has also changed, has transformed in the sense that today to enter into a discourse in the public square requires you to be an authority, an intellectual authority. That means you have to acquire a PhD, you have to have written books, you have to be a legitimate academic within an academic environment. See, I want to caution us against using the phrase intellectual Kshatriya very loosely, because while it is necessary to protest and do tweeting and putting Facebook posts, and it is necessary. I'm not saying that it's not necessary, but I do believe that's not sufficient in terms of what it is to have the, as you put it, the intellectual firepower which comes from learning, from deep learning. You know, so an academic who's deeply grounded in a sampradaya has got deep affinities with certain gurus and acharyas within that sampradaya, but who also has academic credentials, who's got a PhD, who's deeply learned, studied, who has studied Western thought, Western philosophy, theologies, Christian theology, Islamic theology, studied Marxism, but who has also studied Bhagavad Gita, Brahma Sutras, Vedas, Upanishads, who has studied Yoga Sutras. I mean, the enormous corpus of such scholars we have to produce and we have to support. If we don't do it, then we will be hard pressed to, for example, why can't we create a show of our own on CNN? Why can't we an introduction to Hinduism, 60 minutes, presented by Hindu scholars? You know, why do we have to be on this reactive back foot?
Right.
Where Reza Aslan produces a show, and then now we are so intensely troubled by the show, right? What will it take? So therefore, you know, even if for those brahmanas who have taken to other professions, you know, like doctors, engineers, IT professionals, and so on, I would say they should consider, you know, putting aside some kind of support for scholars who are in the academia, who are trying to do this, straddle these spaces and eke out a life and be a legitimate scholar. And we need to create a large community of such scholars, and we need to create institutions which can create these scholars. So these are very challenging and tough problems for us to take on, but we have to do it, and this is the way forward for our community as a whole. So that would be my submission to the brahmanas, you know.
And you want to mention the DCF website or contact where they can get this information?
Yeah. So I mean, I would look forward to the day when a group of Hindus academics get together and put on a show, you know, and not just remain on YouTube and on Facebook. A mainstream show on CNN on Hinduism by Hindus. That would be a milestone for our community.
So with those words, Tatastu, let us hope that in a few years, or at least very soon, we will see that happen. Thank you so much for tuning in. I was with Kalyan and Srinath, and we were discussing Reza Aslan's Believer that aired on CNN last Sunday. Thank you.
And thank you to Desi Plaza for
Absolutely.
hosting us.
Shri Krishna Puttaparthi and Desi Plaza, Dhanyavadaha.
Thank you so much.